We begin with a very interesting one. Mr. Jairam Ramesh in conversation with Mr. Shankkar Aiyar on book reading and discussion. I would like to invite both of them on stage, please. Let's hear a round of applause for them. Mr. Jairam Ramesh needs no introduction, a renowned Indian economist and politician belonging to Indian National Congress. Of course, he is with us as a writer today, has authored quite a few books, Making Sense of Chindia, Reflections on China and India, Kautilya Today, Jairam Ramesh on a Globalizing India. His recent book is To the Brink and Back, India's 1991 story, which is an insider's account of how Narasimha Rao pulled India back from the brink. He would, in fact, be discussing from the book today. He's also written a book, Green Signals, Ecology, Growth and Democracy in India, which has covered land acquisition and mining issues in Odisha. That would also be a part of the discussion today. Mr. Shankkar Aiyar, as we all know, is a prominent journalist, analyst, and author. His path-breaking book, Accidental India, A History of the Nation's Passage Through Crisis and Change, has fetched him national acclaim as a public intellectual. He specializes in the interface of economics and politics. He's currently working on demography, emigration, and implications for the next economy. I would request Mr. Shankkar Aiyar to take this forward from here. Thank you.
Jairam, welcome to the program. Welcome to OLF.
Start.
I have the arduous task of having a conversation with one of the wittiest, and if I may say so, sometimes wicked politician in the Congress party. But first, I must say, Jairam, you have come to the right place. The reason I say this, and I'll relate it to your latest book, Back from the Brink. On July 7, 1991, when a truckload of gold was being shifted in Mumbai, which was then Bombay, I broke that story. Mr. Prabhu Chawla was the editor, and it was published in the Indian Express, which is the host of this function. So, in a sense, Back to the Brink has come to the right venue, and you have come to the right venue. To the audience, I must say that Jairam deserves a big round of applause for writing this book, Back from the Brink. The reason, I'll say why. About 3 years back, I wrote a book called Accidental India. The first chapter dealt with the 1991 crisis. My publishers issued a press release before the release, and in fact the book was released here by the Honorable Chief Minister. My publishers sent a press release before the release of the book, which said that the real architect of the 1991 liberalization and reforms was Narasimha Rao and not Dr. Manmohan Singh. Quite a few of my senior editor colleagues, friends who I know, said, to use a phrase you popularized, that this was a no-go area and they won't carry the press release because after all Dr. Manmohan Singh was a sitting Prime Minister. I'm glad that you've written this book, and these are things that bring clarity to the discourse on how we manage the political economy. In your book, The Green Signals, you speak about speaking orders, which is a tremendously interesting concept. And both your books are, in that sense, speaking books. And I hope more books, more politicians write, because in a democracy, this is really necessary that people who have been in power come, whether they transit from one position to another or one post to another, they must come and relate what actually happens in the theater of political economic or policy making. I remember when Madeleine Albright retired, there were 4 books on her. And the publishers had a trouble actually deciding the title because everybody wanted Madam Secretary as the title. And in fact, there is a serial now called Madam Secretary. So, congratulations on the 2 books, and we'll try and sort of go through both the books and have a conversation. But as a person who has seen politics and where there is a cost to actually speaking what happened, what made you write these two books? What was the thinking?
Well, May 2014 was an electoral disaster for my party. And suddenly I found myself having lots of time. And Parkinson's law is work expands to fill the time available. And suddenly I had huge amounts of time, and I had the need to keep myself physically and intellectually active. And what better way than get the opportunity to writing something, putting something to paper, not in terms of newspaper articles, which have a very short shelf life, but actually in terms of books, which would have archival value, not only to students, to scholars, and to the general public. So I started. The first book was on my tenure as Ministry of Environment and Forests, and I find some of the people who were very angry with me are the sponsors of this literary festival. So that's a sort of ironical situation. But the first book was on how do you balance environment and growth. We need to grow at 8% per year. We need rapid economic growth, but we need economic growth that is not only inclusive but also sustainable. And so that book, this fat book, really is a record of how this balance and how this trade-off between environment on the one hand and development on the other, I tried to bring about in the 25 months that I was minister. It was not easy. It was controversial. It was controversial in the sense that chief ministers of my own party were equally unhappy with me as the chief minister who left us just now. But it was a job I had to do. But what I wanted to demonstrate in this book is how that trade-off and how that balance was achieved. And I firmly believe that environment and development have to be integrated, but in the process of integration, there will be contradictions, there will be complexities, and there will be conflicts. And each of these have to be managed transparently and democratically, and that's the essence of this book, and as to how the battles that I fought, the letters that I wrote, the speaking orders that I issued, two of which became household issues in Odisha, one on POSCO and the other one on Vedanta. So that's as far as Green Signals is concerned. Now this book is really a novel. It's written like a thriller. It's about how the 91 reforms were brought about, how they were designed, how they were implemented. And so this is more sort of analytical, serious, archival, but this one is more fun. It's sort of a quick read. But nevertheless, what I was very clear in writing this book, as also in this book, is that in India, our culture is still an oral culture. We are not comfortable with the written culture. So both books you will find that whatever I have said is backed by written documentation. So I think we need to get into the written culture. The written word is alien to us, particularly in public life. What we often, our memoirs, if you read many of the memoirs, they are based on oral recall or oral history. And I didn't want to get into that because that is notoriously unreliable. So whether it was Green Signals or whether it was the 91 reforms, it was based on archival material, primary archival material, based on the written word, and not on any personalized oral recollections. Now the point that you made about 91 reforms, I just want to respond to that. I think this is a pointless debate. about who was the architect of the reforms. As I have explained in this book, it was a jugalbandi. It was an unusual jugalbandi between a politician, Mr. Narasimha Rao, and an economic administrator, Dr. Manmohan Singh. Mr. Narasimha Rao could not have done what he did without Dr. Manmohan Singh, and Dr. Manmohan Singh couldn't have done what he did without Mr. Narasimha Rao. Dr. Manmohan Singh brought economic credibility, gravitas to the job. Mr. Narasimha Rao provided the political umbrella which was necessary for pushing this profound economic transformation. Dr. Manmohan Singh came to economic reforms out of conviction. Mr. Narasimha Rao came to economic reforms out of compulsion. But compulsion soon gave way to conviction because of the success with which these reforms were implemented. So here is really, this book really is an opportunity of looking back 25 years. After all, next year we're going to be celebrating the 25th anniversary of this shift in economic policy. And what I've tried to provide here is the political dimensions, the debates that took place in Parliament, the debates that took place with trade unions, the debate that took place within the Congress party, which was not united on the issue of economic reforms. So it's that flavor that I have tried to convey in this book.
So to take this conversation further on the process of economic reforms, you've been in government from the 80s in some form or the other. And as somebody who had studied how policy was being drafted, you would know that for a number of years, many economists, right from T.N. Srinivasan to others, had spoken about license, Raj, controls, various issues. The larger question, Jairam, that arises from your book is, why does India await a crisis to deliver change? Now it's the current government has a new slogan that Big Bang reforms requires a crisis. And so I always wonder whether people should start praying for a crisis or whether crisis is a feel-good factor. What is the inflection point at... there's also the Raghuram Rajan introduced the story about the camel being led into the tent slowly so that the others allow. My own sense is that people inside the tent want the camel to come in, but people are keeping the camel out. So why does big change always require a crisis? Does it make it easier, wrenches away the choice?
Well, if you look at the major economic turning points in India over the last 6 decades, crisis has always driven that change. The Green Revolution came about in the mid-60s because of a profound crisis, 3 years of consecutive monsoon failure, Lyndon Johnson's ship-to-mouth policy in terms of wheat exports to India. So, crisis drove India's response in the Green Revolution. Similarly, the crisis of 1991, the balance of payments crisis, the fact that we had only 5 days of foreign exchange by the time Mr. Narasimha Rao became Prime Minister, was the main trigger for doing this transformation. So why do we wait for crisis? That's an interesting cultural, psychological question. But, I think generally we are fascinated with revolution, but we abhor change. We are generally uncomfortable with change because change means certain interests will get hurt,
disrupted, yeah.
Certain habits of working will get disrupted. So the sad truth is that profound transformations, the Green Revolution was a profound transformation. The economic reforms of 91 was a profound transformation. Profound transformations require crisis. But incremental reforms, incremental change do not require crisis. The great lesson, the main lesson from this book is political management is of fundamental importance. How you politically manage contradictions, how you politically communicate, how you politically outreach, how do you build larger constituencies through the mechanism of politics, and how you use political institutions, political parties, trade unions, parliament, legislatures, civil society organizations. That's how the consensus got built in 1991. So I think and in fact that's also the message I might say in Green Signals, that environment is not a technocratic issue. Environment is an issue of political management. How do you manage the politics of high economic growth on the one side and the need to protect your mountains, your forests, your rivers, your land, your water, your natural resources on the other? So I think the importance of political management, which means political leadership at all levels, which means political alignments, political outreach, political communication. And I might add here, and this is, I'm not alluding to anybody, political communication means not just speaking. Political communication also means listening. Listening to different points of view. And consensus does not mean my way or the highway. Consensus means making some compromises somewhere so that everybody gets satisfied. Or, as Henry Kissinger once said, in public life, you never get balanced satisfaction. If you get balanced dissatisfaction, then you have done your job.
So, you touched on a very interesting point on how political management and leadership is fulcrum, the real fulcrum and critical to change. Coming closer to contemporary India, I mean, the UPA under Manmohan Singh had virtually all the members of the dream team of 91. There was Chidambaram, Pranab Mukherjee, Montek Ahluwalia, you were there. It was a government which had 9 former chief ministers. And so there was no lack of capability, experience and all. And yet it acquired the reputation of an anti-growth regime or a pro-corruption regime and crony capitalism, the whole thing. I mean, if one were to write a book of that, I mean, the perception of the UPA, I mean, we could borrow from your title and say, back to the brink. So what happened then? I mean, you were part of this government. I mean, I remember you were the person who authored the 2004 slogan, Congress ka haath, Aam Aadmi ke saath. I must, there was another slogan which I will not name the person who authored it. The other slogan was Congress ka haath, walking stick ke saath, because of the quality of geriatric leadership that was there. But what went? What is the thing that went wrong? Why did UPA, this Singh Parivar magic didn't work?
Well, first of all, neither of these two books deal with UPA 1 or UPA 2. So we're slightly getting off the track. But since you have asked, and I don't duck questions, I'll try to answer them to the extent I can. It's useful to remember, useful to recall, that between 2004 and 2014, you had an annual average economic growth rate of 7.5%. It's not, it's not nothing to sneeze at. It's quite impressive.
Yeah, but perceptions are not necessarily built on facts.
We should have done better. But between 2004 and 2014, economy average annual growth rate, in spite of no-go, and in spite of obstructionist environment ministers like me, averaged 7.5% per year. A very impressive growth record. 140 million people went above the poverty line. And you can argue that this is the force of technology, but the fact is that in 2004, 30 million Indians had mobile phones, and in 2014, over 800 million Indians had mobile phones. Okay? So there is a glass half full side to the decade. But I don't disagree with you that at the end of 2014, there was a disenchantment, a disillusionment, particularly insofar as 2009 to 2014 was concerned. I think UPA 1 did not suffer in terms of perception as much as UPA 2. Now, both UPA 1 and UPA 2 were coalitions. And, coalition politics has its own compulsions. That's number one. And number two, I think we had a highly interventionist judiciary. We had a very aggressive civil society movement of Anna Hazare, which had political backseat drivers. We had a CAG who saw his role as not just audit, but actually questioning the very essence of governmental decision making. Sum total of all this was what you say, that UPA 2 suffered, and the consequences of that was reflected in the election debacle in 2014. So I think, as Dr. Manmohan Singh once said, and I agree with him, that history will be kinder to the UPA decade than contemporary events, just as history will be kinder to Mr. Narasimha Rao than the contemporary events of Babri Masjid, JMM, Note for Vote, and all the scandals that took place between 91 to 96. So I mean that's broadly my perception.
Yeah, so the question was drawn from your point about the essence of political leadership in bringing change. So, would you say that India was in some senses very fortunate that Shankkar Dayal Sharma said no and we chose Narasimha Rao as the Prime Minister?
Well,
and would you say that the choice
question.
of Manmohan Singh...
It's a difficult question to answer. Maybe Shankkar Dayal Sharma would have been like Narasimha Rao. Who knows? Remember, I.G. Patel was Mr. Narasimha Rao's first choice as Finance Minister. And I.G. Patel and Dr. Manmohan Singh were birds of the same feather. So, these are, just read out one small portion which I think answers your question and also looks at, there is I end the book by saying that, the question that you raise, that would individuals have made a difference? I mean, that's the question that you've raised. And the end of the book, there's a paragraph which says that there is a Tolstoyan perspective of history, which holds that individuals are irrelevant and circumstances create events. Another view is that individuals matter and do decisively shape the course of history. My own feeling is that what got accomplished in June, July of 1991 was inevitable if our goal was to avoid the opprobrium of default. The Rao-Singh duo happened to be at the right place at the right time. They had neither bargained for nor lobbied for the responsibilities that they found themselves with, but they were saddled with onerous tasks. So they seized the moment. So would Shankkar Dayal Sharma have done the same thing? Perhaps. Would I.G. Patel have done the same thing? Perhaps.
So that begs the question as to 10 years Manmohan Singh regime. So Manmohan Singh is seen as having been a better finance minister than a prime minister. Would that be fair?
That's a very interesting question. And I have not got into that question in this book to compare Manmohan Singh, the finance minister, with Manmohan Singh, the prime minister. Okay? The Manmohan Singh, the finance minister, had a shrewd, crafty, cunning, almost Machiavellian prime minister. And I use these words in a good sense.
Good sense, yeah.
I am not using it in a negative sense. I am using it in a good sense. He had a crafty, cunning, wise, Machiavellian prime minister who provided the political superstructure in which economic reforms were embedded. Dr. Manmohan Singh, and remember, Narasimha Rao ran a minority government, a one-party government, but a minority government, whom nobody wanted to dislodge because nobody was prepared for the elections. Dr. Manmohan Singh, the Prime Minister, was running a multi-party coalition. Dr. Manmohan Singh, the Finance Minister, faced an unprecedented economic crisis. Dr. Manmohan Singh, the Prime Minister, was a victim of success. He did not face the same dimensions of the crisis. I mean, there were crises after 2008 and then 2012, but not on the same. When you're facing a crisis when your foreign exchange reserves are $900 million, and you're facing a crisis when your foreign exchange reserves are $200 billion, your response is going to be different. So Manmohan Singh, the Prime Minister, the political circumstances, the economic circumstances were completely different. So the comparison is, strictly speaking, I think, not fair. You're comparing apples and oranges.
So, not so much of a comparison as much as the evolution of a person on the ladder of change. But I'll switch to the
Can I just read out one paragraph? Because this is supposed to be a book reading session as well, I'm told. So let me just take half a minute and 2 minutes.
Prabhu, please note that I've got Jairam to read twice.
So, no, I was told as I was coming up that I want to do some reading. So, I don't want to disappoint people who have come here to listen to some portions. This is a chapter in this book on 91, and the title is, this is a fun chapter. It's called The Sanskritist Prime Minister. And I am reading this chapter deliberately, given the political environment today in this country. On 15th of July 1991, the motion of confidence, moved 3 days earlier, came up for voting in the Lok Sabha. But before the actual vote, the House was treated to a vintage Narasimha Rao performance. It was his first major speech in the Lok Sabha as Prime Minister. Rao had been given briefs on different subjects, but he decided, as always, to speak not from the text, but spontaneously. That day, the Prime Minister was at his philosophical best. At times, what he said appeared convoluted, but that was par for the course. He defended what the government had done since it had taken over. He was not partisan, but made the point effectively that the situation he had inherited had left his finance minister and him with no other option but to embark upon a series of tough measures: gold sales, devaluation, talks with the IMF, trade reforms, industrial liberalization, also imminent. The high point, Sitakanji, this will appeal to you, the high point of Rao's 45-minute intervention came when he lapsed into Sanskrit. What have I done? This is Narasimha Rao speaking in the Lok Sabha. What have I done? What had the government done? We know that there are no alternatives to what we have done. We have only salvaged the prestige of the country. Sarvanashe samutpanne ardham tyajati panditaha. Sitakant. Sarvanashe samutpanne ardham tyajati panditakaha. Nilmadhav, you must be knowing Sanskrit too. This is precisely what we have done. I do not say that the economy has been booming or is going to boom immediately. What I am saying is Sarvanashe samutpanne. One more paragraph. I could see that most people did not understand what the Prime Minister was saying. I recall Amarnath Verma, his principal secretary, looking at me with a puzzled expression and then whispering, "Kaho Pandit, kuch samjhe kya?" Tell me, do you comprehend what he said? Later, I told Verma that the Sanskrit saying in the Prime Minister's speech means that the wise man, in the event of total ruin, wriggles out by giving up half his possessions, ardham tyajati. This is done in the hope that he will save himself from total destruction by using what is left properly. Sarvanashe samutpanne ardham tyajati panditaha. Even if Rao's expression made little sense to those present, he definitely appeared Upanishadic. Moreover, he had unknowingly served notice to the BJP. Sanskrit was not its monopoly. The Prime Minister was not done with Sanskrit in the Lok Sabha. He went on to say, naturally, there is a long distance to go. This is not all. This is the Prime Minister speaking. This is not the final solution. This is only the beginning. If you do not have a beginning, you cannot have an end. The typical Narasimha. If you do not have a beginning, you cannot have an end. Therefore, the journey, the Mahaprasthana, the journey, the Mahaprasthana starts today after taking these decisions. I think Mahaprasthana may have been more easily understood by those present, but I am not entirely sure. Regardless, it was a nice Indian way of describing the economic reforms program and giving it a spiritual dimension as well. So this is a sort of a funny anecdote, in so far as the reforms were concerned. Let me just read out one. Do we have time? 1 or 2, 5 minutes? Less than 5 minutes? I won't take long. So, this book is much longer. It is about 580 pages. This book is about 250 pages. So, at the end of 580 pages, I ask, at the end of it all, what does this book add up to? Other than being a chronicle of a ministerial tenure, of a man who started off as an enviro agnostic and became an enviro believer. High economic growth is essential because it generates huge revenues for the government, which can then be utilized for social welfare and infrastructure expansion programs. That is the simple and powerful message of this book, that environment matters, it matters here and now for us, that sustainable development is not a luxury, but an overriding necessity for India, and indeed that sustainable development is eminently feasible. India simply cannot afford to follow the conventional grow now, pay later model of development that has been adopted by most other countries, including China. There is an ancient, and this is how the book ends, there is an ancient Sanskrit saying. I'm using this paragraph because I use the Sanskrit chapter in this book, so there is a Sanskrit chapter in this book as well. There is an ancient
and
Sanskrit,
probably a direction he wants to head.
No, I just want to say that Sanskrit is not a monopoly of only one political party. There is an ancient Sanskrit saying which says, Prakriti rakshati rakshataha. Nature protects as if we protect nature. As the edifice of India's environmental laws and regulations comes under renewed assault because of corporate interests, we ignore that piece of wisdom at our own peril. Prakriti rakshati rakshata. Nature protects those who protect nature. And that's really the message of this book.
So your journey from the agnostic to the believer is interesting. You were Minister for Power, you were Minister for Commerce, you were Minister for Industry, where you voted for green signals in growth. And as Environment Minister, you were seen or had the reputation of the red signal, giving the red signal. So was Jairam 1 more wrong, or was Jairam 2 less right?
Well, I tell you, as you grow older, you become wiser. Okay? And Jairam 1 believed in the blind pursuit of economic growth. I have no qualms in admitting that in 91, I believed in a single-minded pursuit of economic growth. I believed, and I use this word in the book, an obsession with economic growth. I mean, long before some personalities in the current establishment discovered an obsession with economic growth, some of us were obsessed with economic growth. But as I grew older, as I traveled across the country, I saw different aspects of development, I came to understand that economic growth has multiple dimensions, and that economic growth blindly pursued can certainly create winners, but it creates a larger community of losers. So in Jairam 2, as you put it nicely, I was more sensitive to larger social factors, and I certainly was more sensitive to larger environmental issues. So to that extent, my enthusiasm for a single-minded pursuit got tempered, and I changed. Now, some people saw this as a betrayal, but I saw this as a natural evolution. And I went from being a fundamentalist when it came to growth to somebody who saw growth in its larger context and was willing to make some compromises and trade-offs so that livelihoods were protected, natural resources were protected. But in the process, I agree, I acquired a reputation of being Dr. No. That was a price one had to pay.
So in a sense, passion got a prefix and you acquired some compassion about...
No, I'm sorry, it was the other way around. I went from passion to compassion.
Yeah, that's what I said. Passion acquired compassion.
Yeah, I went from passion to compassion. I agree with you.
So, John Maynard Keynes once said that, when facts change, one must change one's view. And so that seems to have been true. But we are in Odisha, and Odisha has been the theatre of some of your reputation being built or maligned, as people might see it. What would you tell the young Odia youth who think that they were deprived of an opportunity at prosperity because investment didn't come to their state or they got it?
No. I have said this before in Odisha repeatedly, and I don't mind saying this again. Mining can be both a boon and a curse. The poorest regions of America are the mineral-rich regions of America. The poorest regions of Europe are the mineral-rich regions of Europe. The poorest regions of Russia are the mineral-rich regions of Russia. And certainly, the poorest regions of India are the mineral-rich regions of India. Chhattisgarh, Odisha, Jharkhand, prime examples. So, what I was trying to convey in this book was that mining, and POSCO was a mining issue, Vedanta was certainly a mining issue, and there were many other issues with many of your corporate sponsors whose names I will not take, who did public hearings. They had public, where they had public, they had no hearings, and where they had hearings, they had no public, and they called it public hearings, and they got the environmental clearances. So, all these games were being played. And, my very good friend, I was accused of, in my own party, of being very close to him. He's my very good friend, the Chief Minister who's just left us. Incidentally, the Chief Minister is more of an environmentalist than I am. He is more committed to the green cause than I was before I became the minister. So I never had any problem with him. And he never told me to do A or B or C or D. The problem is that there is something in the nature of an extractive economic activity that gives surpluses which are appropriated by people who do not necessarily belong to the local communities. So one has to be very careful when one sees the mineral sector as the primary engine of economic growth. I think that was the message that I was trying to convey here, that mining by itself, mineral by itself, is not a recipe for economic prosperity. Japan has no minerals, South Korea has no minerals, but they have become economic powerhouses. So it just so happened that some of the celebrated environmental debates when I was minister happened to take place in Odisha. But those were the ones that got the headlines. There were many other issues which, from a positive point of view, never saw the light of day in the media is concerned. And there I have to put entire blame on your community and on your tribe, because dog eats man is not news, but man eating dog is big news as far as you're concerned. Well, so you guys highlighted only when a show cause notice was given to POSCO, your show cause notice was given to Vedanta, but when 96% of the projects got the clearances, that was not part of your news reporting. But two projects which got stuck, or a couple of projects which got stuck for valid reasons, became huge sensational news.
Well, Jairam, in defense of a profession that I am only a part-time associate with now, I must say that often in UPA 2, man was biting the dog. So there was enough ground for journalists to do what they were doing. But Shampa has just signaled to me that we have about 5 minutes. So I'm going to make this buzzer round. And so, ultimate wit possibility here. So, thoughts on J-tax?
Sorry?
Your thoughts on J-tax?
On J-tax? No, I
the
never...
Jayanti tax.
I never speak about my predecessors, and I never speak about my successors. It's a good rule in political life.
So, there's another J who followed your government, which is Javadekar. The industry seems to be happy with his clearances. Any thoughts on that?
The Ministry of Environment and Forests is the Ministry of the Protection of Environment and Forests. It's not the Ministry of Environment and Forest Clearances. I mean, that's a fundamental disagreement I have with Mr. Javadekar. That Mr. Javadekar should not use clearances as a yardstick for his performance. The yardstick for his performance should be how robustly and how credibly he has protected India's environment and forest resources.
So, in India's position at the Paris summit.
And by the way, the job of the Minister for Environment and Forests is not to make friends. If you have made friends, you have not done your job. More the enemies that you have made, it's a guarantee that you have done your job well. Just like the Finance Minister's job. The Finance Minister's job is not a popularity contest. It's not a beauty contest. The Finance Minister's job is a job that is necessarily unpopular. Yeah, and so if you have a popular Finance Minister, and I won't say who popular Finance Ministers are, if you have a popular Finance Minister, he's not doing his job.
Well, they're not necessarily popular everywhere. In Bombay, they are not popular. So, this government's position on climate change, very different from your position?
Yes, it is in one way, which is my position on climate change, not necessarily my government's position, but my position on climate change is that India must take action on its own because we are vulnerable, 2, because we are capable, and 3, because simply there is no other alternative. This government's position is, we will do, but you give us money, you give us technology. So our actions are conditional. In my scheme of things, what we do on climate change, we must do because it is in our self-interest. Because if we don't do it, our vulnerabilities will increase, and the world's fastest growing economy, the world's third largest economy, surely can find the resources and technology on its own to combat global warming.
The final question, Jairam, is the Modi Sarkar seems to have found answers that eluded your Sarkar.
No, I won't
Well,
say
wait,
that. I won't
and
say
the
that.
follow-up
I mean,
question would be,
I wouldn't
have
say,
Achhe Din arrived?
I wouldn't say that. I think one thing Mr. Modi has demonstrated, he is a salesman, marketer, repackager par excellence, bar none. He can sell, he can market, he can rebrand, he can repackage. So, but in the process, has he fulfilled what he set out to do? Maybe 15 months is not a long enough period. After all, he's got a mandate for 5 years. But on the strength of the 15 months that has been in power, I think he has proved what Mr. Advani said of him. In fact, the best description of Mr. Modi came from his political guru, Mr. Advani. And Mr. Advani said that Narendra Bhai is a superb event manager, and that he has proved that.
Thank you, Jairam. I hope you enjoyed this interaction as much as I did and the audience did. We can take a few questions from the audience. I'm going to be ruthless. If it's not a question, I will tell Jairam not to answer. So, first question, of course, from Prabhu.
Yes. Because I'm asking question because you have mentioned me in your book. So therefore, there is a reference to me also in your books.
Yes.
So
There's a reference to you in the book, yeah.
Yeah. So
A
anyway,
famous interview that Mr. Narasimha Rao gave you.
I have
Yeah.
not written any original book. Mr. Jairam Ramesh, first time I've seen him an author, and he has proved a point that every author tries to hide many things, and he can tell. And his book is also hiding many things which he doesn't want to say, and which are related to him. First is, of course, I must dispel his grief that you say that Sanskrit is not a monopoly of a particular party, which he meant BJP. I want to ask him, you had only prime minister, dhoti clad, Sanskrit speaking, and your party doesn't talk about him at all these days. So you disowned your own prime minister. You disowned your own Sanskrit speaking prime minister because you are challenging that Sanskrit is not the monopoly of.
Why
Question
the
is,
Congress
why you are
disowned
disowned him?
Narasimha Rao, the Sanskrit-speaking
question.
Prime Minister?
Second question is,
Yes.
in his book, because he is one of our best person who thinks strategically,
Yeah.
IIT graduate. He is an IIT graduate also. He was appointed in the Prime Minister's office. And within a couple of months, he was asked to go to Planning Commission, and one Pandit Brahmin, Narasimha Rao, did not trust another Brahmin, Jairam Ramesh, in his PMO. You have not mentioned that. What was the reason for you to be shifted to Planning Commission rather than remaining in the PMO?
No, I mean, I've mentioned my shift, but I have not delved into why I was shifted simply because I don't know why I was shifted. I got a long, story from
you
the
will
Prime
read that in
Minister.
my book later.
I was given a long story by the Prime Minister why I was being shifted. And I listened to him, but I didn't believe him one bit. So, and I've mentioned it in the book, what he told me and why I didn't believe him. So why I was shifted was not the story. But your first question, is important because, in fact, many of the reviews of this book, which have been positive, the one question that has mystified everybody is, why have I written this book and praised Mr. Narasimha Rao? How can I have praised Mr. Narasimha Rao? That's the question, right? I've described this in my last chapter, that Mr. Narasimha Rao, Winston Churchill once said about Clement Attlee that Clem is a modest man and he has much to be modest about. So I have described that quotation of Churchill and said that Narasimha Rao was a much misunderstood man, and he did many things to make himself misunderstood. So, after the first 3 months, when he was simply magnificent, where he could not put a foot wrong, the downhill journey started. And I believe that the political perceptions of Mr. Narasimha Rao within the Congress party and in the larger political establishment is because of what happened in Ayodhya on December 6th, 1992. I think that has clouded a judgment of Mr. Narasimha Rao. And people forget economic reforms and people only remember the demolition of the Babri Masjid. People only remember the vote of no confidence. People remember only Harshad Mehta and the security scam. And finally, people remember only the Jain Hawala case. They don't remember the economic reform. So, he presented and of course, I have to say this, and there are many references to him. The whole Chandraswamy, every political leader has some point of vulnerability or the other. And Mr. Narasimha Rao's weakness certainly was Mr. Chandraswamy. And Mr. Chandraswamy's shenanigans created a lot of political issues with him. But it's true, if you're asking me, has Mr. Rao got the appreciation that he deserves? The answer is no. Should Mr. Narasimha Rao get the appreciation that he deserves? The answer is yes.
Okay, first, one second. There's a person with the mic behind. Yeah, please ask your question. Identify yourself, please.
My name is you have said toilet fast and temple diet. Now, you must not be a great supporter of Modi because a lot of toilets are taken away these days. My question is, you have been a progressive minister, you have a IIT degree to book, and you have done runs, environment ministry work. Now, tell me, why you have opposed GST, which your government only started?
Okay, good. So his basic question is that since you spoke about toilets much before Modi spoke, so you must be a big supporter of Modi today. And that was an observation. And the second was why you and your party opposing GST, right?
No. Let me take the second question first. The Congress party is not opposing GST. The Congress party has consistently said we want GST. We have made certain suggestions for improvement of the GST. Those suggestions have unfortunately been rejected without even a political consultation. So let's see what happens in the winter session. The Congress party has repeatedly reaffirmed its support for the GST. After all, the Congress party introduced a bill for GST in March of 2011, which was opposed incidentally for 4 years by the then Chief Minister, for 3 years, by the then Chief Minister of Gujarat, who is now, as Prime Minister of India, emerged as the greatest champion of GST. But that's a separate issue because, in parliamentary democracies, where you stand depends on where you sit. So if you're sitting in the opposition, you have one position. When you become to power, you take a separate position.
So that doesn't hold true for Congress, that your position has changed because where you sit.
It holds true for us also, but I think the track record, that if you look at the track record when the Congress was in the opposition, when, of course, the period the Congress has been in the opposition is much shorter. So, if you have to adjust for the time period, but you will find generally the track record of the Congress in supporting legislation, when it has been in the opposition, has been better than the track record of the BJP when it's been in the opposition. Now, your first question...
toilets and so
Toilets. Well, in public life, there's no intellectual property rights, So, you have, when you say something, you say something. And I'm very glad that Mr. Modi hijacked toilets and temples. Because I remember when I first said this, that, I said it in Hindi, it got translated in toilet, I said it, Shauchalay pehle, Devalay baad mein. So toilets first and temples later. The BJP, the VHP, the RSS, the Bajrang Dal, and all organizations came to my house, burnt my effigy, put bottles of urine outside my house, and, didn't allow me to leave the house, black flag demonstration, etc., etc. Mr. Modi criticized me in the election campaign, but I'm glad that when he became Prime Minister, he recognized this, and, he took this up, and so he took on. I mean, it shows that, he's able to, I'm not looking for credit from him, okay, as long as he's taken it on, fine. So what can I do? He's Prime Minister. I'm not the Prime Minister.
So that's the 282-44 rule speaking there. So second question, please. Yeah.
No, I think, as I said earlier, Dilmadhav, it's an unfair comparison of Manmohan Singh, the finance minister, and Manmohan Singh, the prime minister. The political circumstances were different, the economic circumstances were different, and I think it would be unfair to compare him in these two avatars. So I have resisted that comparison. So that's my answer to your first question. My answer to your second question, was he subject to natural constraints or unnatural constraints, is that he was subject to constraints. He was subject to constraints. I mean, he was running a multi-party coalition. He was running where, every minister belonging, had
But
independent sources of political authority. One second.
Yeah.
Had independent sources of political authority. He was not running a centralized administration. Centralization can give cohesion, okay? He was certainly not running an administration like Mr. Modi is, where the ministers don't count and the Prime Minister is the boss. Now, does that make for good administration in the long run? You've been a distinguished administrator. I frankly feel that centralization may deliver results in the short run, but in the long run, it's not conducive to the building of institutions which are very important for running democracies. No, I agree. It's the way you manage mining, the way local communities get benefits from that mining. Those are the important issues. And the trade-off that you do between mining, environment, local skill development, local education. I mean, it's a very complex issue. But the point I wish to make is, just by availability of mineral resources does not mean that it's a great. It can be a curse. It can be as much of a boon as much as a curse. Sorry, what is it? Why was there a flip-flop? Yeah. Well, I became minister in May of 2009, and I read the file, I talked to people, and I found that clearly the approvals that were given were not in order. Why they were given, I don't know. But the approvals were not in order, and therefore I felt that as a minister I had the powers. I consulted, by the way, and it's all part in the book, the Attorney General. I went to the Attorney General and I asked him, please give me your legal view. Do I have the powers to review these cases? He gave me a written opinion, which I have reproduced in the book, on both POSCO as well as in Vedanta. Vedanta was a slightly different case than POSCO, by the way. Incidentally, it's been 4 years since I have left the Ministry of Environment and Forests. 4 years. I left in July 2011. 4 years have gone out. 4.5 years have gone out. But Vedanta is nowhere in sight, and POSCO is nowhere in sight. So, to those of you like Shankkar Aiyar, who think that I single-handedly sabotaged these two projects, 4.5 years after my departure, these projects are still derailed. What does it mean?
Well, actually, I mean, it's too great a blame to place on one person. I think that India has singularly failed to have a policy on how to deal with mineral resources, the number of bills that were pending. And POSCO actually left this year. It left Odisha this year. And from 2005, a project which was supposed to start in 2011 leaves this, jettisons the project in 2015, speaks volumes about India's ineffectual policies. So we should just leave it at that. I'll take one last question. Okay.
Hello.
All you guys can sit down. The lady gets the preference. This is the last question.
Very good.
Thank you so much, sir. Good afternoon, sir. This is my question is to Mr. Jairam Ramesh. Sir, there is a school of thought which says that there were no reforms as such in 1991. When you go with a begging bowl, you just execute the conditionalities that are imposed on you. And you're not in a position of strength, so you essentially don't have any bargaining power. So it was in many ways, as per proponents of that school, a beginning of neo-colonialism as we see. How do you respond to that school of thought, sir? Thank you.
Anybody who belongs to the school of thought who says that there were no reforms of 1991, I can only describe as morons. That's the only word I can say. That's the only word I can use. To say that 1991 was not reforms, well, I mean, flies in the face of understanding.
No, Jairam,
flies in the face of
let me intervene on her behalf. I think what she said in her second part, latter part of it, is that it was not so much conviction as a compulsion.
I'm coming to that. There were three pillars to the reforms process. One was a new industrial policy. Second was a new trade policy. And the third was a new fiscal policy. All these three policies had been under discussion for a couple of years before 91. But the political clinch had not happened. It had not happened for a variety of reasons. It didn't happen because of politics. It didn't happen because of elections intervening. It didn't happen because of wide divergence of opinion in the ruling establishment. VP Singh tried to introduce these reforms, incidentally. But as I have described in the book, he could not introduce it. Chandrasekhar tried to introduce these reforms. I have described that in the book. He could not introduce it. But Narasimha Rao then is like a relay race. The 91 reforms was a 4 into 100 meter relay, and the baton then got passed on to Narasimha Rao, who not only ran, but he just took off. The difference was that there was a crisis. We had reached a breaking point, and we had no other option but to do what we did. But to say, now, I don't disagree with the view that the 91 reforms were propelled by compulsion. I don't disagree with it at all, of course. And I've described it in the book. That that's what I saw. If the same compulsion had it existed in 86, we would have done what we did in 86. And I have reproduced in the book a report that I had prepared in 1986, which was basically arguing for what we did in 91. But the circumstances in 91 were entirely different. But the new industrial policy, the new fiscal policy, and the new trade policy were fundamental transformations. It was not tinkering on the margin. Please don't misunderstand. Please don't, fall into this trap of the school of thought which says, nothing happened. Fundamental things happened. Industrial licensing was made a bonfire of. MRTP was made a bonfire of. Many, the CCINE, the trade policy reforms, made a bonfire of. So it was compulsion driven in 91. There were people who were convinced, but the overall political push did come because of compulsion, did come because of the IMF. Had the IMF not been there breathing down our neck, we may not have what we did in a space of 33 days. 21st of June to 24th of July. Everything got done in 33 days. Had the IMF not been there, what we did in 33 days may have taken 33 months. First, it may have taken 33 weeks, may have taken 33 months, and may well have taken 33 years also, I don't know. But the fact that it was got done in 33 days was certainly because of the IMF.
Actually, it didn't happen for 33 years because the first aborted liberalization was 1966. So, but we can discuss this and more questions. Jairam is going to be here. Please, ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause for Jairam to speak as usual candidly. After the session.
Well, you can take the questions off the dais, sir. Please, sir. We'll have to start the next session, sir. You can take, rest of the questions can be taken off the dais. Thank you, sir. Well, if a session is as engrossing as this, time just flies, and that's what's happened. So may I now request the editorial director of the New Indian Express, Mr. Prabhu Chawla, to please come on stage and present some tokens of appreciation to both our panelists here. So on demand, the book is also coming now.
I'm giving this book because he can read about Pranab Mukherjee, who was a better consensus builder than Narasimha Rao.
Some mementos. And yes, a group photograph is also mandatory. In fact, I would request Mr. Shankkar Aiyar to stay back for the next session as well.